So again, Michigan dogman. Eyewitness. This is eyewitness saying. It was like it rode the treetops. Ooh, this is already giving me so much imagination like in my head. Oh,
Mm,
and I'm well known among my friends, but I don't always tell them that I tend to space out a lot and imagine different things when I'm in church, at work, or in a restaurant. Doesn't matter. If something comes to my mind from what I'm listening or thinking about, I space out and I visualize it and I think about it. And now this gives me that the same moment. Like now I'm thinking, I'm there with that creature on the top of the trees.
yeah.
Um, this report actually contains three encounters that occurred in 2016. Okay, I like because this is in modern times. In
Hmm.
rural western Michigan, close to Lake Michigan's eastern shore and adjacent to what has become known as the main stomping ground of the Michigan dogman, the Manistee National Forest. The first of the three encounters begs an unusual question I haven't previously considered. Could a dogman travel from treetop to treetop in a snowy wood? Hmm, that's an interesting question. Hard as it may be to imagine any canine at home in forest canopies, it seemed to the eyewitness that this may have been the case. Unusual circumstances seem to rule this set of encounters. Local historians say the forests around the site are filled with hidden Native American burials. The remains of hundreds of men, women, and children were hastily interred here in 1642 after a large invading force of a branch of Iroquois massacred the resident Potawatomi, another tribe, I guess.
Mm.
The White Lake Historical Society's locally published history booklet states Indian graves have been unearthed and undoubtedly many hidden remains of the unfortunate Potawatomi massacre still remain. Many artifacts of the Indians' culture of the is this
Montague.
Montague area have been found in this past century, the 1800s.
Mm.
Do you want to start with creature one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, the Indian burial grounds again. That always keeps popping up. Uh, so creature one. As for the eyewitnesses, I'll refer to him by a pseudonym. We'll call him Brad. And Brad wrote, "I've seen this creature that resembles a werewolf on the family farm here in rural Southwest Michigan. I'll start by explaining the property layout. The farm sits on 30 acres of woods, creek, and marshlands. All of my encounters have come this year in 2016, from February to about a month or so ago, which at the time of this telling was June of 2016, evidently. The first came on or about the 8th of February at approximately 3:52 a.m. A heavy winter storm was hitting the area with some nasty weather. I was up early to get a jump on the snow shoveling, so the driveway was accessible for the propane delivery guy later that morning. As I was about halfway down the driveway, I heard a loud splash in the creek to the south, about 25 yards away. Thinking it was a deer or two, I stopped shoveling and scanned the creek with and the woodline for any movement. As I scanned the creek, I came to the woodline and saw this pair of yellow/amber eyes, about 7.5 to 8 feet tall, standing right next to a huge oak tree. It took off with a super burst of speed to the west. It leapt into the air, and all I heard for the next few seconds was the treetops clanging against one another. It was like it rode the treetops. I stood there for the next few minutes, questioning my sanity. For the 6 to 7 seconds I saw this creature, it stood on two legs that looked like a dog's hind legs. It had a big wolf like head with a snout and ears that resembled that of a German shepherd. Those eyes of yellow/amber in color.
Okay, thank
And
you. Creature 2. The second sighting came on or about March 24th at approximately 2:38 p.m. I love the detailed parts because in part of my job I have to write certain reports. So if I can put exact time instead of rounding the number, I like doing that.
Mm,
So this person doing that, I, from the professional perspective, I appreciate this. So at
hmm,
2:38 p.m.,
hmm,
I had decided to walk up the creek and clear brush. I always carry a firearm with me on these occasions. I had gotten about 450 yards up the creek that flows through the entire acreage of the property. It was strange to me how completely quiet, or as I say, dead, the woods were. I always jump something up, whether it's a deer or turkey or ducks that are always there. I didn't even hear any birds, which was really strange. Man, this reminds me again of so many stories, but also movies. Like when there's presence of the evil entity, there's always silence. There's no life. There's this
mm.
like absence of everything living. Or even if there's anything alive, it will be either some birds like vultures or maybe wolves or some insects, some bugs. It will be anything that when you
Huh.
think of something beautiful, of something that brings life, colors, that is like useful so much to do maybe ecosystem or whatnot. I'm not saying that vultures are not contributing. God made them that way, right? They have to get rid of the dead corpses and whatnot. But I'm just saying, you usually don't think about something beautiful and life giving when you think of those animals. So in this same
Yeah.
case, like he comes to this area and it's completely silent, and
That's
that's
really good
eerie.
insight. Yeah, that's good
Mm,
insight because I usually think of that as more, oh, there's an apex predator in the area, so all the smaller, everyone's quiet because no one wants to get eaten. Like that's what I think of when I think of silence in the woods. But I never thought of what you just said, which is basically the absence of life. And then the creatures like the vulture is like creatures that are associated with death. And even in the Bible, those creatures are associated with death and the demonic. So yeah, that's a really good point.
yeah. Uh, this spooky phenomenon of utter silence enveloping the era of an anomalous, I don't know how to pronounce this, um,
Anomalous, I think.
anomalous
Anomalous. Yep.
events is known as the Oz factor, and it's quite common in creature encounters. I'll have to Google later this Oz
Hmm.
factor, OZ
Yeah.
factor. I'm intrigued. It was named by British author and investigator Jenny Randalls after the strange alternate kingdom portrayed in L. Frank Baum's book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Okay, makes sense. It refers to the same type of disorientation experienced by Baum's protagonist, Dorothy, after a tornado transported her from a black and white world to a realm of color. I remember the movie, right? It's a classic.
Mhm. Mhm.
It was a brilliant way for the movie to portray Dorothy's transition from the known to the unknown, and works equally well to describe the Oz factor. Those who have experienced it often say that all birds and insects suddenly go quiet. We just talked about this. As a pervasive change in the surrounding atmosphere affects their emotions. Well, yeah, they're scared because they like something is among them. Like when you watch all the Predator movies, like
Mhm.
not Predator against aliens because they're usually somewhere hidden in like caves and underground passages. But when you actually watch the original Predator movies, like if there's Predator in that forest, like the birds are either gone or they're silent because they're scared.
Yeah. Yeah, like in the first Predator movie. Yeah.
Yeah, I've received reports from people who said they felt either profoundly sad or paralyzed. Oof, paralyzed with terror. Sometimes the air seems to change color. This is so strange. How can the air change color? Sometimes the air seems to change color, often to green or gold. Hmm.
That just makes me
Now,
think demonic, like the sad and the fear,
yeah.
right? And then also I think about maybe, you know, in Stranger Things, like the Upside Down, how it was identical to our world, but it was just creepy. It almost makes me think like they're stepping into an alternate dimension where there aren't any of the creatures to make the forest sounds, but it's just you and the evil entity.
So
You know.
are you in this context saying or not? Because I don't want to assume that maybe there could be some portals in this world that lead to something, even though seemingly it just seems like a force like our world. But are you saying that there
Yeah.
could be portals that can actually, for a temporary time, lead you into something where you experience supernatural and you come back? Maybe you don't even come back, but is that what
Yeah.
you're? Okay.
Yeah. That's kind of what I'm just sort of throwing out there as something that I hadn't thought of before until just now when
Mm.
he's describing the air changing, and maybe the creatures were maybe it wasn't that the creatures were being quiet, but maybe it's that they weren't there because he was actually standing in a different part of reality, the unseen part of reality that is all around us all the time. It depends on your theory of the unseen realm, right? But some theories of it posit that the unseen realm is around us all the time and we just can't see it because of whatever reason. And that just made me think of that maybe that's part of what's going on here is sort of a blending of that unseen realm. When we see things like this, maybe it's sort of us seeing a tear in that sort of, like in Stranger Things when they tear a hole in the wall and they could see the upside down through the wall, or something like that. It just seems kind of like interdimensional sort of feelings I'm getting here.
That's good. Okay, so this guy whom she called Bread, right? She's hiding his identity. So Bread continued. I rounded a bend in the creek when up ahead, about 55 yards, was what looked to the back of a black bear that was digging into the bank of the creeks. As I was setting my firearm, of course, the guy didn't back down. He was like, let me go and investigate.
Right.
As I was setting my firearm down on one of the little islands in the creek, I snapped. Oh, this is another cliche moment in movies. He
Right.
snapped a branch. Of course. You either fall down, you either snap a branch, you either what I don't know. It's always something like this. I
Yeah.
snapped a branch and it stopped completely what it was doing. Well, of course, I froze. Man, I don't know if I would even though I'm not a tree climber, I think from adrenaline I would jump like 10 feet high and just try to go if it's even possible to hide on a tree. I don't know if these creatures, if they do exist,
Well, they
if they
climb
can
on the
climb
treetops.
tree, or maybe they can levitate, maybe they can fly. I don't know if that will even help.
They swing on the
Um,
treetops. They just said
oh yeah, that
you.
was in another story. Yeah,
Yeah,
if
you would
these
have been
creatures
eaten.
have the same ability, then good luck to me.
No, you would have been totally eaten
Oh
if
well,
you would have tried to hide in the tree.
well, thank you for the encouragement, right? He said, I froze. Oh my gosh, I would be paralyzed. I
Mhm.
froze and watched as the thing stood up on two legs and started to turn around towards me. It stood 8 feet. Oh my gosh, this is like. This is a Goliath among the other 6 and 7 feet tall dogman and werewolf. This guy was 8 feet tall and had a huge wolf-like head. Oh my gosh, this was like a chief among the werewolves.
Hmm.
So he had a huge wolf-like head, snout, and ears of a dog, and all black fur. Yeah, in the first encounter, the creature's fur was gray. Oh, okay, that's a change. Gray in
Hmm.
color with some white, and this one
Oh,
was
there you go.
all black. Yeah, this is the first
Huh.
story that mentions any other color. Mhm.
Hmm.
It kept glancing over to the east and back towards me. It had not yet seen me. Oh, okay. Well, he's so far he's lucky, and it puts its snout into the air, and it looked like it was sniffing the wind. Makes sense. I'm completely freaking out at this point and reach up to pick up my firearm to get out of the area quickly when there was a splash up the creek. I looked up, and now this thing was on all four legs It still stood 5 to 5.5 feet tall. Oh my gosh. At
Hmm.
this point, I don't want to run out of fear. Yeah, I mean, you cannot outrun any creature in the wild. You can't. I mean, God made them
Right.
fast, right? I mean, okay. So he says at this point, I don't want to run out of fear that it will give chase. So I stay frozen. It looked at me and snarled. What is snarled, by
Hmm.
the way?
Like the expression on my werewolf mask,
Okay.
kind of a,
Mm,
and then a
okay.
growl, a little bit of
Yeah.
a growl with.
So you wanted to intimidate the so-called bread. Okay. And I thought it was sizing me up, and then all of a sudden it looked to the east, back at me one more time, and took two giant leaps toward the east and onto the bank of the creeks. That's about a 25-foot distance. It then jumped towards the treetops. Man, this is another tree topper, and disappeared to the east. Okay, I'm glad the guy survived. Of course, if this really happened, but I'm even more surprised and shocked that all these creatures, I mean, they're not afraid of people, but like, how come they're not attacking people? How come they don't have to eat them? Maybe they don't like human flesh, but I'm surprised they're not attacking and killing people for coming into their territory. They'll just run and go away. So I'm a little bit surprised.
You kind of hear those stories about a lot of people disappearing, and especially in
Mm.
wooded areas, especially like in the Pacific Northwest and things. That makes you
National
think
park, yeah.
national parks and stuff. So there is a relatively high number of people who do disappear every year from what I've heard. So that does kind of make you wonder if some of that does happen, and
Mm.
obviously no one knows about that. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. That's
Yeah.
pretty scary right there.
Okay, so then it says it then jumped towards the treetops and disappeared to the east. I stood there in total disbelief. I got home and my mind just kept racing. Man, I would have moved out, I would have left, because if this thing can smell me, and it can, I don't know if it would come back, vengeful while I'm sleeping or whatnot. Because I don't know. I don't know. I would just leave. I don't care about my job or where I live. I would
Yeah.
move out with those two guys in the previous story. So I decided to confide in my father about what I had seen, and he looked at me as if I were an alien. Said I was crazy and I should get my head checked out. I know
Hmm.
what I saw. Okay, we have creature three, so I leave this privilege to you, Dane.
Okay. The third and final encounter came on May 29th at 8:52 p.m. My dad and I were having a fire down by the creek and we were getting low on wood. He asked if I could go get more wood for the fire from behind the pole barn. A pole barn is like a basic barn with a tin shed put up, or a tin roof suspended by poles, which is why they call it a pole barn. I hesitated and said, "In a few minutes, I'll get the wood." Okay, so I was afraid of those woods. I didn't want to go over there, which is something I thought I would never say. After about 10 minutes, I start to make my way towards the back of the pole barn. It's just about dark, and I keep hearing this rustling and a lower growl like dogs are playing. And when I reach the back of the pole barn, it stops. I light a cigarette and look out into the woods, which are 10 yards away. Again, the woods had gone completely silent, and it was eerie. Then there was a sound like a zipper being zipped up. It was about 30 yards to the south. I waited for a minute and decided to look out to where I had heard the sound, and as I glanced to my right, I saw something move. It was just about completely dark, and there was a stench in the air that was absolutely putrid. It smelled of rotten guts and urine. I figured it was a rotten carcass of a dead animal, and then as I was shining my flashlight, a deep guttural growl, like a raccoon would make, came from the area I heard the rustling sound. So I shone my light over towards the sound, and I saw eyes about 5.5 feet off the ground. The eyes were red in color and were very shiny. The thing I saw didn't have paws on the front; they were long arms and had hands with claws. It really didn't freak me out, as a lot of critters have red eyes when exposed to light. Then this thing stood up on two legs, and this thing was really tall, 8 to 8.5 feet. It growled again and literally turned around and walked away to the south. I thought it had I thought I had crapped myself. I came back home and my dad asked, "Where was the wood?" And I said I didn't feel well and was going to bed. I went out the next day to look around the area. I heard the noise. I found only a deer skin, and the rest of the deer was gone, including the head. Also, two neighbors of mine had heard very eerie howls coming from my family's woods, saying they only come at dusk. They have been in the area for 50 plus years and said they have never heard a sound like the one that they heard. And one more thing, I set apples out for the deer every week and noticed the other day that all the apples were gone, and a rock was in every place where there was an apple. Hmm, that's weird. I have a trail cam on the area as I write this. I also found some tracks that look like a huge wolf's. There used to be deer around here all the time. I had a herd of 50 or so. Now you're lucky to see one or two. It's like they disappeared. Been really strange around here for the last couple of years, and I don't know what to think about it. In all three of my encounters, the thing I saw reminded me of a werewolf. I no longer go near those woods. I was told by a family member that a lot of the wood acreage is Indian burial grounds. I don't share this with very many people at all in fear of getting laughed at or called crazy. Thank you for contacting me back, and I hope I have enough detail on my encounters. Yeah, wow, that's great detail. I'd say that Brad did well in furnishing details, and he was quite certain that the creatures we saw were canines. Two aspects: the fact that one of the creatures seemed to be moving through the treetops, and also the exchanging of rocks for apples, are suggestive of Bigfoot action and behavior. But who am I to say that a wolf like creature couldn't do the same, especially considered that its paws were more like hands with long claws? I was impressed that the legend like existence of local Native American burials Brad had mentioned turned out to have factual basis, with the tragic historic massacre of the area's Potawatomi and its core. That's the massacre of the Indian tribe in the area. Some researchers believe that large scale traumatic events imprint themselves not only on the psyches of survivors, but on something in the landscape itself, resulting in tales of haunted places and ghostly animals. I think of the battlefields of Gettysburg, for instance, and the numerous sightings of ghostly soldiers and other apparitions reported there after Civil War. The Civil War took thousands of lives at that scene. Although I agree with Brad that the creatures involved sound like upright canines, they had some traits that I usually associate with places where shamanic ritual likely occurs, often near Native American lands, as we discussed earlier regarding the UT skinwalkers, and creatures believed to be shapeshifters. In these cases, the eye shine is usually red instead of the canine's standard yellow or yellow green. Interesting. The paws look more like hands, and the creature's height is often estimated at 8 feet or more. The fur is usually, but not always, black, and the creature may have actual shoulders, which ordinary canines lack, and which are needed in order to truly swing through trees. The putrid stench comes standard with all models. Whatever Brad saw, these were all powerful creatures that I wouldn't personally wish to share a farm with. I must note that none of them actually threatened him physically, however. They just took off as upright canines usually do. And if they really were somehow connected to the massacre burial grounds, I'd be surprised if they didn't still take an occasional whirl through the trees just to check up on things now and then.